The countdown to kickoff is on. The Shields Heroes game is coming up on Friday. And of course, that is the game between Nebraska and Iowa. This year, it's going to be played at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln. And of course, the kickoff is at 12:30, and it's coming up on the Big Ten Network. Good evening, everybody. I'm Travis Justice, and my venture into the Heroes game, the Nebraska Iowa rivalry, is quite interesting because I'm actually an Iowa kid. All right, I grew up in Minden, Iowa, and my first ever recollection of the Iowa-Nebraska series goes back to 1981. I was sitting in a parking lot in Aspinwall, Iowa. It was I believe my cousin Lisa's wedding in Aspinwall, and I remember going out to the car and listening to Jim Zabel call Iowa's upset win over Nebraska in 1981. It was the biggest thrill I think I remember as a kid, and I became a lifelong Hawkeye fan at that point. So then my radio career started. I went to KNOD in Harlan, Iowa, and on the weekends I was the board operator. I got to run the Iowa Hawkeye network at KNOD, so I listened to Jim Zabel call all those games, and it carried over into basketball. Then I went to school in Des Moines at Grandview College, and then after college I got into television. I got out of radio, went into television, and my television career brought me actually closer to my hometown of Minden, but I worked in the Omaha market. So I started at KPTM, which was the Fox affiliate. I was there for about 7 years, and then I went to KMTV, the CBS affiliate. And during that time, I got to cover Nebraska football. I got to cover the 94 national title, the 95 national title, the 97 national title. All that time being an Iowa fan, but earning so much respect for the Nebraska program, the players and the coaches within it. And so I kind of have this mixed life, right? I mean, some people think it's funny because now I'm back on the radio, but this time I'm in Des Moines. I'm on KXNO radio in the mornings. I do the Morning Rush on 106.3, and I actually host the Iowa Hawkeye call-in show on News Radio 1040 WHO. That's the Jethro's Barbecue Sound Off. But I also do a podcast that's Nebraska related with my good friend, Dr. Rob Zatechka, who, he's a former Husker. And so I really developed a lot of friendships over the last 20 years. And that's why this game means so much to me, because I'm an Iowa fan, but I have so many friends that are also former Huskers. So tonight we've got a fun night planned for you. Former Iowa Hawkeye great Chuck Long is going to join us. He was an Iowa quarterback from 1981 to 1985. He was the 85 Heisman runner-up, a first-round draft pick of the Detroit Lions in 86. Former San Diego State head coach. He was an assistant coach at Iowa and Oklahoma. And right now he is the CEO and executive director of the Iowa Sports Foundation. So think like Iowa Games. That's the Iowa Sports Foundation. Dr. Rob Zatechka, he was a 3-year starter at Nebraska, original pipeline member. Now, if you listen to the Husker Doc Talk podcast, you know that Dr. Rob was the one who came up with that term, the pipeline. He was the 1994 Co-Big 8 Athlete of the Year. For you Iowa fans out there, you may or may not know this, but he shared that honor with Fred Hoiberg. That's right. The 1994 Co-Big 8 Athlete of the Year was Fred Hoiberg and Dr. Rob Zatechka. 1994 Campbell Trophy Award winner. What is that? That's like the Heisman for academics. Yeah, it says he's a doctor, so he's really, really smart. The 1995 fourth-round pick of the New York Giants, and he is currently an anesthesiologist with Ortho, Nebraska. And now joining us, look at this motley crew tonight on a Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. Chuck, I'm going to start with you. And by the way, happy Thanksgiving, gentlemen. But Chuck, I want to start with you. 1981, you were a red shirt that year, if I'm not mistaken. And do you remember that Iowa win over Nebraska?
I do. It was a great win. Freshman, just greenhorn. And I couldn't believe that number 6 or 7 coming into the country. We were probably 67th, and we just had a remarkable game. Pete Gales was the quarterback. A 10-7 victory. It was really defense, great emotion of that crowd.
Dang, Chuck, we got our connection is really bad. That's you're cutting in and out.
Day, Nebraska team. Dave Remington was on that. They had a great football team, and we upset them. I got.
Which the interesting thing is, I mean, so Chuck was a red shirt that year, correct?
Yeah, he was a red shirt that year. Remember now,
Now, my understanding is though that was like one of the first kind of early in the red shirt process. Kind of like they can now, freshmen could play a little bit. So didn't Chuck play in the bowl game that year?
I think that's right. Is that right, Chuck? I think we're going to be on a little bit of a delay here, but we'll wait for the answer. You played in the bowl game in 81, correct?
I did play in the bowl game in 81. It was a game. I got the last two plays of the game. We were getting beat 28-0. And Hayden turned to me, "Get in there, youngin. Get on TV for the hometown crowd." So I went in there and got the hometown of Wheaton, Illinois, and they practically threw a parade for me because I played two plays Rose Bowl because that was the power of the Rose Bowl back then. Because I grew up in Big Ten country in a bowl game in the Rose Bowl.
Wow,
that's absolutely crazy. So
that's 5 bowl games that Chuck played in his career. You think of that now. I mean, even now that seems a little bit odd. I know the red shirts get that 4-game rule, but back then the idea that somebody actually played in 5 bowl games in their career is pretty amazing to me.
Do you ever think about that, Chuck? The 5 bowl games?
Yeah, I played in 5 bowl games. I had a weird ruling. Yeah, I had a weird ruling. Yeah, this is gentlemen. I'm going to try to come back on my computer.
All right, we'll do that, Chuck. We'll see if we can come back on your computer. Sounds good. Well, see if we can reconnect. It is really delayed, so I'm going to we'll wait for Chuck. And the modern technology, right, Rob? I mean, it's really kind of weird how that modern technology works, isn't it?
Well, let's keep in mind Chuck is over in Iowa right now.
See, here you go. You're throwing it out there. I know what you're doing.
It's not Chuck's fault. I mean, you guys got landlines there back in what, 2019?
I think so. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Chuck's on a dial-up connection because that's all that's available.
Now, be nice. Nice.
I gotta ask you. So you started this off talking about how, like, one of your early memories of Iowa versus Nebraska was that the 81 game.
Yeah, it was the 81 game. I would have been 10 years old. So that's really one of my first college football memories. And I wouldn't say I was a huge football fan at all at that point, but it's just one of those things that really sticks in your mind of like when college football comes into your life, right? And it came into my life in a parking lot in Aspinwall, Iowa, which is a little bump on the wall in Crawford County. And in Crawford County, Iowa, and it stuck with me ever since. I found out who Jim Zabel was at that point. I found out who Ed Podolak was at that point, and it's just one of those memories. You know how Lyle Bremser is that for a lot of people in Nebraska?
Yeah, I get that. I'm going back to the parking lot thing with you.
Yes,
like parking lot. So you do? Is it Betfred Sports?
Well, no, So it's not. It was the Aspinwall Community Hall parking lot because I didn't want to be in a wedding. I'm sitting there at a wedding, and I'm like, I don't know what to do at a wedding. Everybody in there, all the old folks in there drinking beer, smoking cigarettes.
I'm just saying, you hang out in parking lots a lot.
Now you're sending a weird connotation to people that I'm like this parking lot guy that does freaky things in a parking lot. That could not be.
Well, that and the fact that you like your big kind of the thing that hooked you on college football was a win over Nebraska. So you hate Nebraska, is what you're saying.
I do not. Now, Rob, see, you're baiting me here, and I don't like that.
I'm doing everything I can to bait you here.
As I said, I am an Iowa fan, but I respect especially you guys as players and the coaches. When I was younger and I was covering the team, I thought I knew more, and I came in right around the Lawrence Phillips stuff, right? So that would have been 94, 95. 95 was the Lawrence Phillips stuff.
Yeah.
And hell, I was still pretty young then. I was 25 years old when that happened. And, well, here's Chuck. We're going to try Chuck again. But I was 25 years old when that happened. And, I thought, boy, I knew more than everybody else. But that I've grown quite a bit more. Chuck,
okay, I can already tell Chuck's got a better connection right now.
Gentlemen, I'm good.
Yes!
All right, we're good to go. Okay.
Yes.
So Chuck, Travis and I were talking about kind of like early experiences and things that kind of hooked us on college football. And I'm gonna turn into sort of like the Travis Justice of former Huskers here, because Travis is one of these guys who he's like this Hawkeye fan, Cyclone fan, Husker fan. He kind of has sort of a love-hate affair with all three teams.
I do not.
No, not you. You've got a love-hate affair with all three teams' fan bases.
I do. I really do.
But you don't love and hate them. They all love and they either love or hate you.
That's there is a lot of truth to that.
Well,
yes.
But we were talking about just kind of that early hook. And so the kind of thing that got you going down that path of following college sports and college football in particular. So, Chuck, I guess the question I have for you, what year was it when Iowa hit number one? They had that run at number one to start off the year. Was that 84, 85?
That was 85, and we reached number one right before the Michigan State game, I believe.
Okay.
Early October. We vaulted to number one. You know how it is going number one back then too early. You want to go too early, So, but
big old target.
Yeah, we went number one. We played upset-minded Michigan State team. They had Lorenzo White on that team. He was a 2,000-yard rusher that year. And, they had us on the ropes. We went on a 2-minute drive, got it down to the 2-yard line, and we called our last time out with about 28 seconds to go. And this is a true story. Now, I should set it up. Michigan State had George Perlis as their head coach. Phil Parker was one of their safeties. Norm Parker was their linebackers coach, former defense, the late, great Norm Parker.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
So Phil Parker, who's now the current defensive coordinator at Iowa, was one of Michigan State's safeties. And
That's correct.
And Norm was their defensive coordinator.
Yeah, and Norm was not the D coordinator. Now that's even better. The defensive coordinator at Michigan State was Nick Saban. The only time we beat Nick Saban. So we get it down to the 2-yard line, guys, and I get to the sideline. I'm thinking, we got one play left, really, and I always think great leaders think outside the box, and Hayden Fry could do that. But I get to the sideline, and I'm thinking we're going to throw the ball or something like that. He says, Charlie. He called me Charlie. And he said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And we've never run this play. We've never talked about this play in 5 years I was there. Was not in the game plan. He said, we're going to call 47 pop out, which is really a fullback ISO play between the left guard and center, right down to shoot, give it to Ronnie Harmony. We give it to Ronnie Harmony up and over the top. He says, don't give it to Ronnie. Don't tell anybody in the huddle. Just go in there, call 47 pop out. I left 47 pop out. Don't tell anybody. Don't hand the ball off. Put it on your right hip and go around the right side and you'll score a touchdown. I looked at him like he had two heads. I go, yeah, are you kidding me? I said, have you seen me run, coach? You really want me to do that? all it takes is one guy in the backside. If you stay at home, defensive football, Rob, you have one guy, your backside cornerback, just stay at home. You're not going to get the ball carrier anyway. And wait for the bootleg or wait for any trick plays over there. Well, I went in there. I called the 47 pop out, I break the huddle, take the snap. I fake it to Ronnie. He went up over the top. That backside cornerback on the goal line bit and took Ronnie Harmon. I went around. There was nobody there. And I said to myself, how did he know that? Because all it took was one guy to stay backside and tackle me. So I love telling that story because Nick Saban was the secondary coach along with D coordinator. So his secondary guy blew the game for him. So anyway, we vaulted number one. We stayed number one for 6 weeks.
So kind of the side note to this story, and the reason I ask about this, so I was actually, both of my parents are Michigan State grads. Yeah. And so I grew up in Nebraska, but it's kind of one of these things where I grew up watching Big Ten football because my parents were Big Ten people. Was a huge Michigan State fan as a kid. I think if anybody follows our podcast, they know I'm kind of a closet Michigan State fan. Got recruited there. George Perlis recruited me to Michigan State when I was coming out of high school. I graduated high school in 90, and Michigan State had won 2 out of the previous 3 Big Ten titles at that time. So when I was either sophomore, junior in high school, that's when Lorenzo White was a senior. They had Percy Snow, Tony Mandrich, Andre Rison, that whole crew of guys there. But when I think about that, those things that kind of like bring you into college football and serve as sort of that hook that gets you interested in the sport. Both of my parents, they're Michigan State grads. Both my parents are from Iowa. So I grew up watching the Hawkeyes play all the time because all of my mom's side of the family, especially my dad too, but mostly my mom's side, it was all Hawkeye fans. And so I remember that 81 season very well, but the thing that really sticks in my mind was that 85 season because I was at my grandfather's house, and this is, I'm sure you've got a few stories for this game, but the Iowa-Michigan game that year, we watched that at my grandfather's house in Burlington with my mom's entire family there. And it's one of these things, it didn't matter. I mean, we were, truth be told, we were A-OK with Iowa. As Nebraska people, we were A-OK with the University of Iowa, partly because, well, like I said, a lot of family there. The other thing is you guys are playing Michigan, which pretty much everybody in the world hates because that's the way God intended it. But I want to hear about that Michigan game in 1985 because I was probably about 13, 14 years old. I would have been 13 years old, or I'm sorry, I was 14 years old at the time watching that game. Mm-hmm. And I remember,
just to let you know, how do you know Rob's from Nebraska? He lives in the past. Just to let you know.
Killing me, dude. Killing me.
Hey, we all live in the past.
I vividly remember watching the 85 Iowa-Michigan game and just, I mean, that was basically a 3-hour-long prayer to see Michigan get beat.
Well, it's a great story. And by the way, Travis, if you guys want to go a little extra tonight, because we can go. I'm fine.
Oh, cool.
And you have to ask me about the 1982 game at Nebraska. It'll be one of your favorite stories. One of my favorite stories. You'll like it. But anyway, so Rob, so is a couple weeks later, October 19th to be exact, 1985. We're number 1. Michigan's number 2. There's no social media back then, but it felt like I think every newspaper across the country was there.
That game was huge.
Yeah, well, it was the only, if I'm not mistaken, it was the only 1 versus 2 game in the middle of the season since like 1953, something like that. Because they're very rare. They were very rare to get number 1 and 2 in the middle of the year. So we were 1. Michigan was 2. They had Jim Harbaugh, the late great Bo Schembechler. As their head coach, had a really good defense. They had the number 1 defense in the country that year. So it was a very surreal week, building up this game. You know how it is. You get on campus and you're going from class to class and everybody's patting on the back. Even the professors are into it. Hey, good luck, Chuck, blah, blah, blah. And it just was, you could cut the tension with a knife all week long, and it just kept building up. Brent Musburger's coming to town. He's doing the game. He's in his heyday at that point in time. And so anyway, Hayden was so magical. I mean, I can go on and on about Hayden Fry, of course. I mentioned how he could think outside the box with the bootleg in 85 against Michigan State. But we were wondering how he was he always tried to loosen us up with a joke or some kind of comedy routine or whatever before the biggest games of the year. And we were wondering what he's going to do in this game because everybody was really uptight. Well, before the game, in the pregame warmup, Bo Schembechler has his big M on his sweatshirt. He has his hat on, and he's chewing his gum, like he used to do. You remember those days, Rob? And he's on the sideline during the pregame warm-up watching his team warm up. Well, Houghton sends over a fake long snapper and our starting punter right in front of his sideline. And this fake long snapper, who's never snapped before, is snapping this ball into the ground, over the guy's head, into the ground. And Schembechler's watching this with amazement. He finally says, Coach Fry, come on over here. So Coach Fry comes over. He's got him set up, He goes, hey, Coach, you're not going to have this long snapper snap to your punter today, are you? And Houghton said, Coach, we don't plan on punting today. And we turned around and walked away. So, so Schembechler was so mad. Rumor has it he went up and threw all the garbage cans against the wall. He was so mad at Houghton for doing that. But that was Hayden's way for loosening us up. We saw it all unfold, and it was really cool. But it was a very tight game. We won on 4 field goals. We were down 10-9, and we had to take it on a last 4-minute drive and get it down to the 26-yard line. And our magical walk-on kicker, or former walk-on kicker, Rob Houghton, who incidentally lives in Michigan today, Bo Schembechler tries to ice him twice with 2 timeouts. And after the second timeout, he's walking out on the field. He turned around to all of us on the sideline, and he said, guys, I got this. Don't worry about it. So he went out there. Back then they had the tee. You guys remember the tee?
Oh yeah, it was like a 1.5-inch tee, wasn't it?
Big tee. Mark Vlasic, a quarterback that went on and played in the NFL for 6-7 years, was the holder, and he laid down the snap, and Rob kicked it. And I'll never forget the euphoria and elation of that crowd as long as I live. It's the loudest crowd I've ever been a part of, and I was in pro ball and then coached for 20 years and all that. But it was a great crowd, and we had a ball. I think that we all spilled out downtown afterwards too, all together. But it was the defining moment of the Houghton Fry era, defining moment of being part of that era. And for me, it's a defining
moment of Iowa football. I mean, if you look over the history of it, it's still probably one of the most replayed and talked about games. I do want to remind people, if you're watching now on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, if you have comments or questions for Chuck or Rob, just leave them in the comment section. We are able to take questions. You can also leave your comments there. We are going to get to this year's Heroes game. I promise you that. But Chuck, you mentioned to ask you about the 80. So you beat Nebraska in 81. That was in Iowa City.
I want to hear the 82 story.
Yeah, so you go to Lincoln in 82.
Well, let me. I know we were kind of cutting in and out before on the 81. The 81 was a significant victory, as I said. It was the victory that launched Houghton Fry and Iowa. And don't forget, guys, Michigan and Ohio State had a lock on the Rose Bowl for 15 years straight, from like 67 to 80. It was either Ohio State or Michigan. Iowa broke through in 81, as you know, Travis, and it made everything possible for anybody else. Iowa was the first team to do it. Well, that 81 game was significant. Well, fast forward to 82, I become the starting quarterback. Now, we have a young football team, and they had everybody back, and they had revenge on their mind. It was a real hot day in Lincoln. I was born in Norman, Oklahoma, Rob. I don't know if you know that. I grew up a Boomer Sooner. I watched every Oklahoma Nebraska game growing up. We shut our house down, locked the door. Don't knock on our door every Thanksgiving. We're watching OU Nebraska. Both my parents went to Oklahoma. They were 3rd generation Oklahoma Sooners.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I grew up a Boomer Sooner. So anyway, I had both sets of grandparents there from Oklahoma. I had like 20 family members and my girlfriend and everything. So they were at this game. It was a hot day. I'll never forget it. And about 120 on the field. You know how that old turf can get just smoking hot.
The old AstroTurf was brutal.
And so it was the worst day of my life. We are getting pummeled. I'm getting sacked. I'm throwing interceptions, fumbles. A snap went over my head, shotgun snap. 42-0 in the middle of the 4th quarter. So I call a timeout, and I go to the sideline, and Houghton had traditional white pants and white shoes and a black top, a Hawkeye top. And I get to the sideline, and he is livid. he calls me Charlie because my dad was Charlie and he loved my dad. He said, "Hey, Charlie, why are you calling a timeout? Keep the clock running. This game's over with. Let's get out of here." I threw up all over his white pants and white shoes. I puked all over him. And he looked at me and he looked down his pants. He said, get this boy out of here. He told the trainer to get me out. So he benched me on the spot. Now we shower up and everything, get cleaned up after the game. I walk out to my family, and the first person that hugs me is my grandmother from Ponca City, Oklahoma. And she's got this short, little Southern sweet voice. And she hugs me and she says, "Chuck, you don't have to play football anymore if you don't want to." So I said, "Grandma, it's only one game. Give me a break here." But she wanted me to quit on the spot because she didn't think I could handle it in the Big Ten. So anyway, that was my very first start as a collegiate quarterback.
Wow. So your first start was at Memorial Stadium. I'm going to ask both of you guys this. And Rob, it's a little different for you because you never played in the Big Ten. You were a Big 8 guy, right? All the way through. So Oklahoma was that rivalry.
Yeah, we never did play.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. We never did play any Big Ten teams the whole time I was in school.
Yeah, you didn't. So my question is, though, and Chuck, you played against Nebraska in 81, 82, and you have that Norman connection. Rob, you've been around me now and been around it. How important is this game to both schools? Because Nebraska fans don't want to say it's that big. Sometimes Iowa fans want to say, well, Minnesota, Wisconsin. I personally believe for the long term of the Big Ten, this can be a great rivalry. I really do believe that.
I think there's kind of this, I'm trying to think of the word or the phrase for it. There's kind of sort of this weird emotional disruption between Nebraska and Iowa fans where this isn't a historical game. I mean, you've got some great historical moments, but it's not like Iowa, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, where you've got these teams that have played each other for decades and decades, and they've got all of this history. You've got these trophies that, I mean, I got to be honest with you. The Big Ten, the old school Big Ten trophy games, when you talk about like Paul Bunyan's axe and Floyd of Rosedale, and those are really kind of cool. The history behind those, it's interesting. It's cool. I absolutely love it. Nebraska versus Iowa is never going to have that.
I would agree with that.
But what it's got is you've got two states that are incredibly similar. You've got two schools that are similar. You've got two football teams. Nebraska fans are going to hate me for saying this, but historically are kind of similar. I mean, you look at kind of Iowa with Hayden Fry coming in and basically what he did at Iowa kind of mirrored a lot of what happened at Nebraska when Bob Devaney came in a decade and a half prior to that. It's one of these things where there's a lot of similarities between these programs, between these universities, between these states and their fan bases that makes, in my opinion, makes for a great rivalry. They're not happy with each other. They don't like each other. This isn't going to be a respectful rivalry. And it's not one of these things where you're going to come up with a trophy. You can do these manufactured trophies like, hey, we brought Nebraska into the Big Ten, and we're going to do the Heroes Trophy for the Nebraska-Iowa game. We're going to do the Freedom Trophy for the Nebraska-Wisconsin game. Rivalries have to have something organic about them. You can't just manufacture them. The fact you've got a border state and two fan bases that I think don't like each other much is a great thing. I love it. And I want to see this game. At some point, Nebraska needs to win a few games here because I need this to be a rivalry because Nebraska really doesn't have one right now. Oklahoma was a great one while it lasted until the Big 12 and how that's since imploded. But even Oklahoma, Nebraska, that was probably more of a rivalry in Nebraska fans' minds as opposed to Oklahoma fans' minds. Every Oklahoma person I've talked with, all the Oklahoma players I know, have always said that OU Texas is rivalry 1A, Oklahoma State is rivalry 1B, and then Nebraska was like a solid number 2 behind those. So I think it's a rivalry. There's an organic aspect to it, and it has to do with the fact that you've got so many similarities, and these two schools don't like each other.
Chuck, your thoughts?
Yeah, I liked, growing up a Boomer Sooner, I always thought the OU Nebraska was the rivalry between the two, more than Texas, only because it was Thanksgiving Day. I mean, you had everybody watching it. There weren't a lot of games on. That was it.
Let's be frank here. You're talking about Texas. Nobody likes Texas.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But to give you a little history, I don't know if you know this, Travis, but after the 81 game and 82 game, Coach Osborne and Coach Fry decided not to play each other. So they didn't want that anymore.
Why?
Because they wanted to get win. I know Hayden wanted to get preseason non-conference wins to build his program. The more wins you had, the better chance you had to go to a bowl game, and there wasn't a lot of bowls back then. So he wanted 3 or 4 winnable games. So it's probably more Coach Fry going to Coach Osborne and saying, "Hey, we like to back out just so we can get some more wins under our belt." And Coach Osborne agreed with that. And then I remember being on Kirk Ferentz's first staff in '99, and we played Nebraska that year. So it was rekindled, I guess, between Coach Osborne and Coach Fry. Said, "Hey, let's do it again." So they got that on the schedule. Coach Fry was not part of that game, but we got it back on the schedule. But like Rob's saying, I thought this needs to be a big rivalry. This could be Nebraska's big rival as well as Iowa's. I was thinking when it formed, there would be like beer bottles over the head in Council Bluffs, going to the bars on the border and just, beer bottles over the head kind of stuff, And then they made it. I really liked the trophy game, the Heroes Trophy, where they recognize a hero in each state. And they put that on the Big Ten Network, which I'm a part of. I love that. That's really cool. Maybe that's really made it into a nicer rivalry, but I'd like to see it ramp up. I think it has a good chance of ramping up to being a great rivalry. I don't think it's there yet. I just think it needs to ramp up more. Like you said, Rob, and I obviously, I like Iowa winning, want Iowa to win, but really to make it a great rivalry, it's got to be neck and neck every year, and it's got to be probably trading off wins every year to make it a great rivalry like that. Back in those Oklahoma-Nebraska days, that's the way it was. So, but yeah, I'd like to see more of a border war, and maybe that'll happen in time.
Chuck, I'm going to ask you a question about let's just dive right into the game, right? Because Adrian Martinez is not going to be the quarterback for Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And look what happened in Vegas. Nebraska started a 4-point favorite. Adrian Martinez comes out. Iowa goes to a 1.5-point favorite almost instantaneously. Mm-hmm. It's kind of backed off now. Betfred Sports has it as an even spread right now. But you're a former head coach. You're an offensive coordinator, obviously, at Oklahoma, an assistant at Iowa. You're the head coach at San Diego State. You find a quarterback now that you haven't seen play all year long. How does Iowa get ready for Logan Smothers? I mean, there's virtually no tape on the guy. How do you prepare for something like that?
It's hard. I mean, with no tape, you just you look at all their schemes and you think, you kind of guess which schemes he's going to be good at. I will say this is a dangerous game for Iowa, just because you look at the stats, and stats aren't everything. Obviously, with Iowa this year, having 9 wins and being last in the league in total offense in the Big Ten, kind of throw the stats out the window. But Nebraska's offense is second in the league in total offense. They're not scoring. Their point per game is only 28 a game, so they're not punching it in like they should off of the yardage they're getting. That's been their nemesis all year. But it's hard to prepare for a quarterback you haven't seen. You just don't know, and that's an advantage for Nebraska, having a quarterback that Iowa hasn't seen if they play it upright. Now, my guess is they're going to have to taper down the schemes a little bit and what they're doing. Nebraska's offense is really fun to watch. I mean, they do a lot of different things and misdirection. And you're like, with Martinez, it's like, how are they doing all that stuff? I mean, they're doing a lot of stuff with them. And I doubt they're going to be able to do that with a new quarterback, but you never know. I mean, he's been doing it. He's been sitting there watching and getting some reps at it, but it's really, Travis, really difficult to prepare when you haven't seen a quarterback.
Rob, what do you think you're going to see out of Logan Smothers? I mean, there's a lot of just, I mean, the problem with Adrian Martinez was Chuck will be back. I think he's going to get a beer like you did.
I took my laptop with me to go get another.
This is great because I need another beer too. But in all seriousness, Rob, I mean, how much freedom do you give? And by the way, you guys are drinking beer. I'm going with the Woodford Reserve. I'm just going.
I like Woodford.
Yeah, I'm going straight with the whiskey tonight. Yeah. Rob, how much freedom do you think that Scott Frost gives him? Right? I mean, or this could actually be better for Nebraska that he won't take as many chances. He won't try to force something. He won't play dumb maybe late when it's close.
Well, you hope that, and I guess kind of when I'm thinking about this, in my mind, it's one of these situations where you want him to be a good, solid game manager. And I don't think in this particular game, the fact that you're bringing a guy in with this little experience, you don't want to put the game on his shoulders. Martinez is a guy who, when he's on, can generate some pretty amazing stats. I mean, we've talked on the show before about guys who are winners, guys who are championship quarterbacks, guys who are stat monsters. I've always kind of maintained that I love Martinez. He's seems like an incredibly high character guy. He also seems a little bit like a stat monster to me in the sense that he's one of these guys who generates a ton of yardage. Is he putting the points on the board, though, that are going to get you those wins? And we haven't quite seen that. Is he one of these guys who is going to deliver that clutch play? I mean, you talk about what like Chuck was talking about, where when he runs that play where they run the fake to Ronnie Harmon, is Chuck Long going to be able to take that clutch play and get around the corner and win the game for you? We haven't seen that out of Martinez yet. We haven't seen that where he gets in that clutch situation and he's able to put the team on his back and win the game for you. I don't know if you're going to be able to go in with Logan Smothers and you're going to ask this kid who doesn't have that level of experience to shoulder the load and win the game for you. I think that's a heck of a lot to ask of this guy. Now, if you ask him, hey, you've got some decent guys around you. You've got some okay running backs. You got some good wide receivers. You got some stellar tight ends. Nebraska's almost Iowa-esque now in terms of the tight end capabilities that we've got. Go be a game manager. Get the ball from Cam Jurgens and get it to those other guys as fast as you can get it to them in as efficient a manner as you can get it to them, and let those guys shoulder the load. Now, here's my worry, though, about this game is that the bottom line is always going to come down to when you look at Nebraska this year, there's a number of problems they've had, and it's a broken record: special teams, turnovers, penalties. If you don't have those things cleaned up, you're going to lose to people like Illinois and Minnesota. If you don't have those things cleaned up, you can put out an incredible effort against a Michigan State, a Michigan, an Ohio State, and Oklahoma, and you're going to come up just a little bit short because you don't take care of the ball, because you have inopportune penalties, because you have special teams gas. My worry is that even if Logan Smothers comes in and does a near flawless job of managing this game, Nebraska is still prone to those turnovers, to those penalties, to those special teams mistakes. And if they don't have those cleaned up, I think Iowa wins in a close one. I worry about Nebraska in that sense to a great degree. I don't think Iowa blows Nebraska out. Pretty much nobody's blown Nebraska out this year. It's just a case that Nebraska doesn't have that ability to close these tight games against good opponents.
Well, go ahead, Chuck.
Along those lines, Iowa, and that's a good point that Rob makes. But Travis, you look at Iowa's team this year; they're really the wins that they're getting are teams that are just beating themselves. They just fall apart. They just melt in the fourth quarter. Whatever they do, the two teams that went into the game and said, "Hey, we're going to protect the ball and just be solid," Purdue and Wisconsin beat Iowa. But the rest of them really, in my opinion, just beat themselves because they make so many mistakes, like Rob's saying. And that's been Nebraska's problem all year long. They're just beating themselves every game. That's what Iowa's living off of. So if Nebraska's doing that again, look out. It will be an Iowa victory.
Well, and you bring up a good point, and that was actually going to transition to what I was going to say, Chuck, is that against Wisconsin and Purdue, Iowa did not force a turnover. Mm-hmm. And that was huge, right? And this offense, and Chad Leistikow in the Des Moines Register had an article today or yesterday saying, listen, the Iowa offense is getting better. No, it's not. It's really not. And the statistics don't tell you that it's getting better. We were talking about an offense that's ranked 124th in the country. I mean, that as an offensive guy, I mean, there are weapons there. I mean, Keegan Johnson is a weapon. Arlen Bruce is a weapon. Mm-hmm. The running back is. You have weapons there. Why is this offense? Is it the offensive line? Is it Brian Ferentz? What do you think's wrong with this offense? Because there are players there.
There are players. I would even go a step further and put more 11 personnel on the field, which is one tight end, one back. If 11, 3 wide receivers, and put Tyrone Tracy in the slot. Put Bruce and Johnson on the outside, Tyrone Tracy, and then you have your best personnel on the field. But I just think it's a system that is. It's a system that's not going to generate a lot of yards. It's not going to score a lot of points. It's one of the rare fullback offenses in the country. It is a young offensive line. I will say that they were struggling early trying to find the best 5. A very young offensive line is really the main reason. And the offense at first, Travis had Petrus, Spencer Petras, and a young offensive line. An immobile quarterback and a young offensive line was not a good mix. They needed a guy like Padilla earlier on just to be able to move around the pocket and extend a play or two. Now, this last game, I thought Padilla was more like Petras. There wasn't much of a difference there, but Padilla does give you a little action with his feet. It's an offense in the last 4 or 5 years. It's just been kind of the same. They just haven't really, in my opinion, grown. I will say this, and this may sound harsh, but I believe it's because our offense has kept us out of the Big Ten West the last probably 3 out of the last 4 years. With our defense, a top 10 defense 3 years in a row. I don't know if you know this, Travis. It's Iowa, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson are the only 4 that had top 10 defenses in the last 3 years. And we have a top 10 defense. You have to take advantage of that and get in that and win that West. And I thought we had an opportunity to win that West for several years, and our offense has held us back from winning that West. Now, it remains to be seen this year, the ways the season's going. But the other part of that is just things that they're doing. They finally, I felt, against Illinois, and I've been saying it for weeks on another podcast that I do with Tom Kakert of Hawkeye Report. They need to do misdirection. A lot of jet sweep run game series where you trick the eyes of the linebacker and hand the ball off, or you fake the handoff and give it to the jet sweep, or you run boots and play action off of that. And Brian Ferentz started doing that this last game. It's really the only chance they have. And the other part of it, as Rob knows, you got to have some pulling guards and tackles, down blocks, angle blocks. You got to have those.
Now you're talking dirty to him, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Rob knows what I'm talking about. The pure zone, outside, inside zone for Iowa, they don't have the guys up front yet. The ability yet, or the development yet for that. You got to give your O-line a chance and get some misdirection, and they're not doing a lot of that.
Well, I love what you're saying about the O-line, because it's one of those things. Nothing's better than big guys running. So, I mean, that's the greatest thing on the planet. So I got a question about when you're talking about the Iowa offense. I mean, from a capability standpoint, are you talking about more of just from a play calling, or I don't want to put you too much on a spot here.
Yeah,
play calling versus the talent capabilities.
Bingo.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, and it's a loaded question. I admit that, because I mean, I look at some of the guys they've had there now. Obviously, every time it seems like there's a Nebraska kid playing for Iowa, this question comes up because I'm a big Noah Fant fan.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely love what his capabilities were. I look at Keegan Johnson. I mean, I went all through college with Keegan's dad down in Lincoln, and it's one of those things where I look at guys like that, and all I can think is like, well, just give the ball to them. I don't know, 3 out of every 5 plays, and your offensive productivity is going to be just fine.
Mm-hmm. I think. You look at the offense, of course, I've been a coordinator and all that. You get, first of all, who are your best personnel and put them on the field. Some years it's 11 personnel with 3 wideouts. Some years it's 10 personnel with 4 wideouts. Some years it's 12 personnel with 2 tight ends and 2 wideouts. It just depends. The Kittle, Noah Fant, Hawkinson days. You want to put more 12 personnel out there. I think their best personnel is 11 personnel with Laporta and Johnson and Bruce on the outside, to put Tyrone Tracy in that slot, and you got Goodson in the backfield. I don't think they're comfortable with that. You got to be comfortable with these systems and these personnel groups to be able to do that. And apparently, it just looks like they're not. The RPO game that we all talk about, I like to see more of that, but they're not comfortable with it. It's just not their MO. And they always go back to what their MO is of trying to run the ball with their inside-outside zone. So they're trying to go back and manage the game with what they're trying to do. I just think it's an antiquated offense. I think, this offseason, however this year turns out, they need to really look at that and make really see and decide if they want to continue it or overhaul it and bring something else in, which can be done. When I was a coordinator, we went all over the place depending on what our personnel was. We did a lot of different things according to who we had coming back. So you can tweak your system enough, and I believe you can, to fit your personnel. I just don't think they're putting their best personnel out there right now, and hence they're last in the league in total offense, and they're struggling scoring points. You look at Illinois, they had so many chances to punch it in. They got 1 touchdown. Couple of a kickoff return. They got a defensive touchdown and 4 field goals. They're just not punching it in enough. And when they play those good teams that protect the ball, like we talked about earlier with Purdue and Wisconsin, then you're going to be struggling winning those football games. So, but with this defense that they've had, they've had a chance to get into some win some West championships, get in that Big Ten championship game, and that offense need to really look at that and I think overhaul it.
Rob, I'm going to transition to Nebraska now because we've talked a lot about Iowa, but we haven't talked a lot about Nebraska. We talked about obviously Logan Smothers coming in, but where Nebraska struggles is, and I talked about this on my radio show the other day, and that is this university used to be called I Back U. It can't run the football. It cannot run the football, and the special teams are horrendous. And look at Iowa. Great defense, great special teams, bad offense. Nebraska, great defense, great offense, horrible special teams, but on offense can't run the football. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's always a combination of things. I'd love to be able to say there's a great one answer here, but I think you've got a situation where I think when Frost and his staff first came to Lincoln, I think they looked around and they wanted to make a little bit of a statement in terms of the type of guys they were recruiting. I'm talking about the offensive line here. And they wanted that 6'8", 6'9" guy. They wanted these giants. They wanted to be able to match up with some of these bodies that they're seeing, Iowa, Minnesota, et cetera. The problem is that I think there's a big difference between a guy who's huge and a guy who can block. And those are 2 different things. And my worry is that, Nebraska's got a couple of tackles right now with Ben Hart and Corcoran, who you've got these tall, lanky guys, but they don't have the ability to get low. They don't have the ability to generate leverage in the blocking game. Now, you had a guy in Teddy Prehaska who was a true freshman. I know guys who know Teddy pretty well. I mean, if you follow the podcast, you know that. He was talking about the fact that the potential to start was there, and he saw the fact that he might have a chance coming. And he did. He ended up breaking into the starting lineup, played, I think, 2.5 games as a starter, and looked great. Now, he's a tall guy. He's a 6'9" kid, but he's one of the few guys who can get low, get that ankle, knee, hip bend and get low and generate the leverage needed. The guys they've got without him, since Teddy got hurt, all of a sudden that offensive line's regressed again to the point where you've got guys on either end of the line bookending it who can get low to generate blocking power in the run game. The other thing is they remain too high in the passing game. You still have to be able to have that hip bend and have that lateral movement, and those guys don't have that. And that has been a huge problem for Nebraska with those two guys in there. And my worry is you don't have anybody else behind them that the coaching staff feels comfortable putting into the game. There was a lot of times when I played down there, if somebody wasn't getting it done, you always had somebody else that you could put in. Right now, when you look in Lincoln, you've got a handful of some really good guards and centers, and then essentially you've got 2 offensive tackles, and that's it. And those 2 offensive tackles have a pretty poor track record now in terms of being able to, A, generate any kind of edge blocking for the run game, and B, provide any kind of edge protection on a pass rush. And that's a major problem for this offense. The other thing is that when you look at the running back position, I think they've got some guys that have some pretty good talent. The problem is none of these guys have gotten very consistent time. You see every week is a different kid back there, and you're not seeing that continuity. You're not seeing that consistency in terms of what these guys are able to do or capable of doing. Now, I don't know if that's because we've got a stable of running backs who across the board aren't that good. I don't know if it's the fact that they're trying to they're kind of in sort of a constant carousel of playing different guys to find out who gets hot at any given point in time. But at some point, you got to pick a guy, and you kind of got to stick with them and let that guy sort of ride it out and see how he does.
How about special teams? I mean, Scott's been adamant that he doesn't need a special teams coordinator. Iowa has one. I mean, you go back to the Charlie Jones 100-yard kickoff return last week. That was drawn up. They drew the freaking play up during the week, Rob.
And I get that. Now, and again, I'm not saying you got to have a special teams coach. When I played at Nebraska, special teams were a huge emphasis, and performance on special teams was very much an expectation. Those are the 2 words I use with special teams. It's got to be an emphasis, and it has to be an expectation of performance. And I don't think we're seeing that right now. I don't know if you necessarily need to have a special teams coach, but you got to have that expectation, and you got to have that emphasis on it. You got to have the practice time on it. And I don't know if Nebraska is currently doing that. I would like to see is at some point you get somebody on the coaching staff. I don't care if it's the tight ends coach. I don't care if it's the outside linebackers coach. But you got to have somebody on the coaching staff who has experience with coaching kickers. And that's something we did have at Nebraska. Dan Young was our kickers coach. He did it for a couple of decades, and he was an absolutely outstanding kickers coach. I don't necessarily think they have to have a special teams coordinator, but they got to have somebody who can coach kickers. And I'm not talking about somebody who read the most recently published manual on coaching kickers. I'm talking about somebody who's done it before and has had success coaching kickers before. But I think if we get somebody in there who has experience in terms of coaching these guys, I think that will make a huge difference. The other thing is you've got to make it an expectation. If it's a case of throwing starters out there, you put starters out there, but whoever is playing on special teams needs to be treating special teams like this is the most important job they've got. And I don't know if they've got that right now in Lincoln.
Chuck, I do want to show you this. David Max from HuskerMax.com says he was at the Freedom Bowl in '84 when you destroyed Texas, by the way.
I see that.
55 points.
That was the greatest game I think I ever watched you play.
And, let me tell you that story. So it was pouring rain. We're in Anaheim practicing all week, and it was bright and sunny, beautiful. And then we're on the bus going to the game. It's just pouring, downpour. First time in Southern California all year long, I guess. So on the way, I'm like thinking on the bus, how am I going to throw the ball in this? This is ridiculous. So I get in the locker room, put my stuff on, put my uniform on, and we go out to pregame warmup, and it is pouring. And I could not grip the ball in the pregame warmup. I'm like, how am I going to throw? And I get inside the locker room. We're so wet, we had to change our undershirt again because it's so wet. We didn't have Under Armour back then. And Bill Happel, one of our receivers, I'll never forget him. He came up to me in the locker room and says, Charlie, how are you going to throw the ball? What are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. I guess Coach Fry's going to have to run it more because I can't grip it. We go out there and we throw for 460 or whatever. I was throwing ducks. Rob, I was throwing ducks up, and they caught everything. I mean, they just literally caught everything in the rain. It was unbelievable.
Chuck, well, let's go back to the special teams. As a head coach, how much time did you spend on special teams? Did you have a special teams coordinator? And I mean, Charlie Jones, Torrey Taylor, Iowa special teams are something special this year.
Yeah, not enough. If you don't have a coach, you better be in there as a head coach. I did not have a special teams coach. I split it up like everybody did. I think when you have the 10th coach now, you're allowed to have 10 coaches. I think that gives you room to have a special teams coach to get eyes on everything. It's hard to get eyes on all 6 special teams units. And so if you don't have that coach, and Rob's right. I mean, if you don't have it, you don't necessarily need it, but as a head coach, you better be in every single one of those meetings and make sure you're on top of every detail of the special teams units. So, but when I worked for Bob Stoops at Oklahoma, that's what he did. He was in every special teams unit. He was coaching in that room, or at least he always had a coach assigned to that unit for film study, but he was coaching every unit. And the guys on the team knew that the head coach, it was important to him. So if you are not in there as a head coach, you better hire a special teams coach. That would be my answer. But so if you don't have a coach, you better be in there as a head coach. And obviously Iowa has a special teams coach, so Kirk lets him do all the work. But I'm sure he's still in on special teams. There's so much fine detail to it. There's so many things that can happen, right and wrong, to all 6 of those units. You better be on top of it as a head coach and make sure your guys know that it's important.
All right, but we're running up on that 8 o'clock hour, and I want to be respectful of you guys' time. But Rob, we'll start with you. Give me your game prediction and how you think this thing plays out.
I think we see exactly what we've seen out of Nebraska the entire season. I love Logan Smothers. I think the kid's an amazing athlete. I don't know if he's got the experience to carry Nebraska to a win in this type of situation. When you look at some of the other losses and changes Nebraska's had, it's just too many variables here. I appreciate what they did last week against Wisconsin, but I think at the end of the day, you've got a team that still has to try and figure out how to fix special teams turnovers and penalties. I think it's a very, very close game that Nebraska ends up losing because of their inability to clean up those things. I'm going to say 24-21 Iowa.
Wow. A Nebraska guy going against Nebraska. That's a first, which kind of scares me a little bit. But Chuck, you heard Rob's analogy. Well, give me your analogy on this.
That was the exact same score I was going to give in Iowa's favor, 24-21. Just because
great minds thinking alike.
Yeah, we're thinking alike, right, Rob? Here's the thing, though, Travis. Padilla, he hasn't been in an environment like this yet.
True. That's we're talking 95,000 people, man.
Yeah, this is a frenzied crowd now. Don't forget, Nebraska's playing for a trophy, and it's their bowl game, and they want to launch into the offseason coming off a victory, and they have a home game. They have the ability to do it. So Padilla's going into a frenzied crowd. Padilla came in, at Northwestern. There's no crowd there. It's all Iowa crowd. It's like a home crowd for Iowa. Then he came back for Minnesota at home and Illinois at home. So he had that crowd behind him. Yeah, although I'm sure he was nervous, he had it behind him. This is the first test for him going into a hostile environment, and it is hostile over there. It's loud, and it will get loud. Do not be surprised that Spencer Petras comes into the football game.
Wow.
So if they are struggling under Padilla,
holy shit, man! You're dropping just
there's no, in my opinion, there's no reason to just keep Padilla in there, and if he's struggling, just get Petras in there. He's got game experience on the road, and you can worry about it in the off season. Those guys fighting it out. You just go in there and just try to win the game that way. But do not be surprised. And I will say that it's going to be a close game, a tight game. I do believe Iowa will win because Nebraska is going to make mistakes.
Excellent. I tell you what, if you guys would like to follow this knowledge on social media, you can do so. Follow Chuck Long at Chuck Long Iowa. That's at Chuck Long Iowa on Twitter. If you want to follow Dr. Rob Zatechka, you can at Doc Talk Sports. And if you want to follow me, I have no idea why you would want to follow me, but I would highly encourage you to do so. You can do so at Travis Creates. Gentlemen, stay there because I want to talk to you when we get off. But I just want to say thank you so much. I know it's a Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. I appreciate your time, and happy Thanksgiving to you both.
Happy Thanksgiving, gentlemen. Dr. Rob, it's nice to meet you. It's good to be on with you. Thanks, Travis.
Absolutely. Pleasure's all mine.
All right, guys, stay there. Thank you so much for watching tonight. We really appreciate it. The Heroes game coming up between Iowa and Nebraska Friday at 12:30. It's on the BTN. And make sure if you want to listen to me, you can do so on the Jethro's Barbecue Sound Off of News Radio 1040 WHO from 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock. For Chuck Long, for Dr. Rob Zatechka, I'm Travis Justice. We will talk to you soon.